New op-ed for the New York Times, MSNBC legal analyst Charles Coleman argues, quote, black men are waiting for a Democratic Party that delivers for them. And that, quote, for black men, particularly younger black men, there is a frustration around not feeling like the party's agenda speaks specifically enough to them and their concerns. Just days ago, President Obama spoke directly to black men as he campaigned for Vice President Harris in Pittsburgh.
You're coming up with all kinds of reasons and excuses. I've got a problem with that because part of it makes me think, and I'm speaking to men directly now, part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. And you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for that.
And Charles Coleman joins us now.
Charles, I agree with the former president. I absolutely think that is something that is a genuine thread. How do you pull on that point that the president made at the end there, that there is this sort of hesitancy because she's a woman?
Well, good morning, Michael. I do think that President Obama is speaking about a particular segment of this population that does have a problem with the potential the candidacy of Kamala Harris because she is a woman. And I think that notion of misogyny is something that exists and is true. However, for as much respect as I have for the former president, I have to say that I don't think that those comments, at least not in the form that he made them, were helpful at the time to accomplish the mission. At the end of the day, do we want to be right or do we want to be effective? And I think that the brute force of saying get rid of the excuses doesn't necessarily send the right message to a group that's saying that they don't necessarily feel heard. Now, for the people who are just using that literally as an excuse, quite frankly, at this point, they should be dismissed because I don't know that there's anything that's going to actually make them turn out. But for the population that I wrote about in the piece, for the population that represents persuadable voters, I think that actually acknowledging that they have legitimate concerns and not necessarily feeling like they're being dismissed as excuses is really important to being effective, given that we have less than 30 days to go.
You know, Charles, I find that I don't necessarily disagree with you. I just feel like that perhaps President Obama felt emboldened, and I mean, I encourage people to take a look at the totality of his remarks there, because the vice president, people can make these claims about some other candidates, but Vice President Harris, long before she was at the top of this ticket, has been centering specifically black people and black voters in her engagements on the campaign trail. I mean, she's done a number of these tours, if you will, and the last tour that she did prior to becoming the top of the ticket was an economic opportunity tour that was specifically focused on black men. And so I think part of the people that are saying, oh, folks are using this as an excuse, because yes, for many other candidates, they have not focused and not specifically drawn their attention to black men. But as you write in your piece, which I enjoyed the piece, I really did. And I think I encourage people to read it all. I think it's in print in the New York Times today, actually. So kudos. You write in your piece about Democrats taking another look at civil rights and expanding what they think of when they think of civil rights. And you talk about economic policies, if you will. She is, in fact, doing that. And so I don't understand.
Well, Simone, I'm really glad you brought that point up, because one of the things that was a critical point for me was to decouple Vice President Kamala Harris's candidacy from the Democratic Party. And I center the Democratic Party in the piece because, quite frankly, given everything that you've just mentioned, I feel, and I think that a number of people feel, that there is a disconnect between what Vice President Kamala Harris wishes to do as far as black men are concerned and what the party understands the assignment to be, if you will. I don't necessarily know that they're on the same page. I think an example that I would use is the way that the party was using black media, or not using black media, if you will, to reach certain audiences. As you know, there were a number of people who were upset about the way that the candidate, not only the campaign, but also the party itself, was spending money not using black vendors and black media to reach black people. That represents to me a disconnect in terms of where the priorities of Vice President Kamala Harris are and how they're being expressed in the party. And it's also important to understand that we didn't just get here because, or at the start of Kamala Harris's ascension to the top of the ticket. This is a long-term problem, and this is not going to be solved in November, regardless of who wins. This is a party that this is a problem that the Democratic Party has to reckon with, not something that needs to be placed on Kamala Harris's shoulders.
I just want to underscore that the research does bear out a lot of what Charles is saying, that if you look at this as a young man problem, different than looking at it as a young black man problem, that when they actually polled Biden and Harris versus Trump, Harris was doing better against Donald Trump among young men this summer than Joe Biden was, that the angst seems to be with the party itself. And the question I will throw to the group, because I am smart enough to know when a conversation needs to be in the community.
Alicia's like, now, you know, I'm people of color. Okay, yes.
Here's the closest I come to understanding it, which is we're having the same conversation in the Latino community, right? And I do think that when we talk about permission structures, there's a question of this is happening. This is factual. And at the same time, the more headlines that are out there that assert it, if it opens up the permission structures for what we're not talking about large numbers of voters here, right? But we're talking about an election where margins matter, that it gives those margin of voters in the black community, in the Latino community, additional permission to come out and either vote for Donald Trump or stay home and not vote.
Well, what do you think, Mr. Chairman?
Well, I want to take Alicia's point and just kind of flip it this way. Charles, are we at a point where finally there's a recognition that black men exist politically? I think and that for generations now, they have largely been left behind in all of the national conversations, with a focus and leveling up on the success and prosperity of African American women, for example. And so all of this right now has come to a head. And Donald Trump, we make fun of the gold lame sneakers, but they become a symbol of a lot of things.
You know, Michael, I think that what you have just illuminated is spot on in as much as people in this moment. I talk to my father about this every day, and he's he has a lot of angst, like, not now, please don't talk about this right now. And there's a fear that the scale will be tipped in a way that will hurt Democrats, because this is a conversation that has been avoided for the very reason that you talked about for far too long. And that is how we got here. We did not wake up here. This has been the result of literally decades of political neglect that has harmed and not seen black men. And it happens to be culminating at a moment that their stakes are extremely high. So you're spot on with that. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with the timing, but we are where we are because Democrats didn't control what they could for as long as they could, when they could.
I know we have to go, but I will just say for the last 3 cycles that I worked in politics, black men have been a target in terms of a persuadable voter target for Democrats in campaigning. So I just would note that, I'm just saying now, I was in the room.
You were in the room, but it wasn't on the street.
Okay,
and
all
the
right
problem.
now, I gotta be quiet.
Charles Coleman, thank you so much. We're going to have you back to have more of this conversation.